What's going on, everybody? Welcome to a special wild card preview edition of Bills Chat. I am Josh McCarty. With me today for a Bills Broncos preview is Luka. Luka, how are you doing on this fine Friday afternoon?
I am doing fantastic. I know it's titled as Bills Chat Live, something we used to do regularly. We are live-ish. We're not live. But this is a pre-recorded thing and stuff like that. As you can see, there's sun outside. I'm wearing a Bandits jersey. It is my fault on why I'm excited for a Bandits game tonight. That's why we had to do this pre-recorded overall. But we're going into a super wildcard weekend, Josh. And what's not to be excited about? Last night, Thursday night, was a very entertaining Notre Dame win in playoffs to kind of start the mega playoff weekend, we can call it, I guess, maybe. And then now tonight we have another college football playoff game leading into the NFL playoff weekend. That it is 3:54 currently, not to give an exact time, but 3:54 Eastern right now. And Josh, very excited to lead ourselves into the weekend and get things going.
Yeah, and this is an interesting matchup, right? Because the Bills are sitting here at 8.5-point favorites over the Broncos. And if you've been following the national media this week, there's been a lot of, oh, this Broncos defense is a tough matchup for the Bills. And, there's been, the usuals on Twitter that are like, don't take this Broncos team lightly. Luka, if the Bills were to lose this game, what would that look like? What would have to happen in this game for the Bills to actually lose this game on Sunday to the Broncos?
I think the script is already known. I think we saw it in the Monday night game of these exact two teams last year, right? And it's not the fact that the Broncos came and really asserted their dominance per se. It takes a lot of early hiccups by the Bills to maybe not be mentally there, I guess is the way to put it, not have their A effort going into the matchup and kind of get behind the sticks a bit, have to fight their way back into the game to get back in rhythm. But the clock hits zero before you really have the opportunity to do so, and or you just keep shooting yourself in the foot at the worst time possible. There's plenty of moments from that Monday night game that happened last season that, we don't have to relive, but overall, it just felt like, every one step forward, you're taking two steps back, or when you finally take control of the game, you've figured out a way to screw it all up in the end anyways. So that's what it ultimately feels like it's going to take. I think the point spread kind of also says that when you are, as the Bills, an 8.5-point favorite, I believe that's others that are trying to, with educated research and decision-making, trying to show that it's like, hey, this is a one-score favorite that clearly has the capabilities of pulling away. And ultimately it would take a little bit more than just the other team showing up and being a little bit better on the day in order to get the win. And I think that truly is what it is when it comes to this Broncos team needing to pull the upset, and or what it actually would be kind of the Bills falling on their face to end up losing the game against the Broncos.
It's funny you mentioned that game last year. I was on with our friend Joe DeRosa on Cover One on Tuesday night, and we were talking about the Broncos game last year that the Bills ultimately lost. And I said, it's almost frustrating that game is really solely remembered for 12 men on the field, because if Will Lutz makes that field goal on the first try, nobody cares about 12 men on the field. 12 men on the field ends up masking the actual problems that Luke has been referring to just now. And it's the fact that the Bills turned the ball over 4 times in that game. And that's the one thing the Bills have really avoided this entire season, is turning the ball over. And I thought it was interesting looking back on it. The Bills have only had one game this entire season, the Colts game, where they turned the ball over more than once in a singular game. And that's so funny because the Bills' very first drive of the season ended in a turnover against the Cardinals. The Bills are driving down. You might remember this. Cardinals get the ball first. Bing, bang, boom, touchdown. And then the Bills are driving down. You're thinking, oh, the shootout's on. Josh Allen sack fumble. And you're like, oh, no, we suck again, kind of thing. And, it did not end up bearing fruit in that. I'm with you. I think it would have to be things like that, turnovers. And, that is going to be something that the Bills are going to have to prove. This is a new season now. This is the playoffs. And you have to prove that what you showed in the regular season can carry over to the playoffs. So far, Josh Allen's track record in the playoffs would make you think it would. But if he were to come out and have a 2 or 3 turnover game against the Broncos, even in victory, there would be a lot of noise around the fact that, oh, no, like what happened to the regular season Josh Allen that we all saw, and it was really protecting the ball. Luka, there was some news on Josh Allen today. Let's go ahead and get through that real quick. Lamar Jackson was named the AP all pro team, first team quarterback. And historical data says that pretty much lines up with who the MVP is going to be. It's the same people that vote on both awards. So, a lot of us were thinking that Josh Allen will be the MVP, but it sure seems like at this point, with none of the betting sites even making that available to bet on right now, that maybe we're looking at a year where Lamar Jackson wins his third.
Yes, history would indicate that would be what is going to take place. The last winner who was not first team All-Pro being John Elway in 1987. And if you look into it, I know I mentioned this to you before we kind of started the show here. The only reason it feels like Elway won that one is because both Jerry Rice and Joe Montana ate each other when it comes to their votes, because if you totaled their votes, it would be more than what John Elway had, primarily more with Jerry Rice. But overall, that's what it took in order to get that MVP over those two. So, it feels like that's a big hit to the Josh Allen for MVP. What I will say is, if there was a time for that trend to be bucked, this would be that one. It's going to be truly telling to see kind of if people were rewarding Lamar for his statistical year with that award, and then are truly separating, All-Pro being, hey, you're the best statistically at your position, therefore you are awarded this position, whether it's the first team or second team. And then from there, is the MVP truly down to that valuable word in the award itself? Because that's where you start getting into those intangibles, things that were argued in kind of the reverse last season when it came to that award. Is that still going to hold true, or is there just kind of a bias or a shift in how it goes from year to year? And really, there's just no true way to know who inevitably will win that award. It's nothing against Lamar either, right? Lamar had a phenomenal season, and there's always going to be, it feels like, this Lamar versus Josh Allen discussion. It's probably never going to go away because they're two extremely dynamic quarterbacks that are going to be with their respective teams for a long time. I will say this, there's even a hole in my argument when it comes to All-Pro being statistic only, because if that were the case, Joe Burrow would probably be in there over Josh Allen. So overall, it's just something that you can definitely hang your hat on, and being a first indication that kind of it is a positive for Lamar as an MVP candidate, is a negative for Josh Allen as an MVP candidate. But when it comes to the NFL awards, you never know until you know. And overall, or at the end of the day, or however I want to wrap this point up, I will just say that as someone that bets the season awards, I went into last year's awards really assuming that my bets weren't going to hit. And then somehow Myles Garrett came away with that Defensive Player of the Year award, even though in my eyes, TJ Watt should have been Defensive Player of the Year. But I bet Myles Garrett, and boy, did I enjoy that because of it. So you have to wait and see. But yes, the first team All-Pro, congrats to Lamar. You get that award. Josh gets the second team All-Pro, is what it is. And when you look at the All-Pro rosters in general, just to kind of wrap it up completely, it's funny how, if you want to talk about a valuable player, the Bills had one. If I didn't look at it fully, but I remember seeing that the Broncos had a total of 5 listed All-Pros on their roster.
Between
Bills,
first and second team, yeah.
Between first and second team. And here you are, the Bills with only Allen represented are 8.5-point favorites.
Right.
That should tell you everything you need to know when it comes to be true value to your team, and kind of what that does for your team overall for success. But that being said, we shall see what happens when it comes to the NFL awards.
I like the point you made about potentially this is the voters' way of kind of splitting it, where, in 2003, if you go back far enough, the Peyton Manning and Steve McNair were co-winners, and there was a lot of chatter like maybe this is a co-winner kind of year, and maybe giving Lamar first team All-Pro, but not giving him MVP as a way to do that. Who I could be grasping at straws at this point. It's certainly, if you follow the data, which I think is the safest thing to do, it seems like Lamar's on the verge of winning his third MVP, which would be disappointing for Josh Allen, who has obviously had a phenomenal season too. Ultimately, though, both of these guys, whether they win MVP or not, whether they're All-Pro or not, They both are chasing something bigger, and that does start this weekend with the Ravens playing the Steelers on Saturday and the Bills playing the Broncos on Sunday. And they do seem like, at least based on the point spreads of their games, on a collision course for a massive round 2 matchup in Buffalo between Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. And that, I think, is significantly more important than any award that's announced the week before the Super Bowl or the week of the Super Bowl. All right, Luka, what is your matchup of this game? I'll give you mine first, and then you let me know what you think is your most important matchup of the game. For me, it's going to be a combination of James Cook and Ty Johnson against the Broncos linebackers. And I'll tell you why. When you look at this Broncos defense, you look at a lot of the metrics, they're very strong against the run. They're very strong against the pass. They have, for my money, the best cornerback in the sport, Pat Surtain. And, Riley Moss is obviously very good on the other side. There's not a lot of holes in this defense. One thing they struggle with, though, they are a bottom 10 team in the sport when it comes to covering running backs in the passing game. And we've seen where in Detroit, the Bills really featured Ty Johnson as a weapon out of the backfield. We know that's a strength of James Cook's game. I do think the ancillary weapons on this team outside of receivers, when you talk about Johnson and Cook and Ray Davis for that matter, and then you also factor in Kincaid and you factor in Knox, I think those guys are going to be front and center for the matchup game with the Bills, Joe Brady trying to figure out a way to consistently move the ball on this Vance Joseph defense. So before I get your matchup of the game, what do you think about the chances that this Bills offense could actually feature a lot of James Cook, Ty Johnson in the passing game?
I think there's a heavy chance on it. I think your point about Surtain and kind of eliminating a side of the field, and effectively you have to figure out a way to create production outside of whatever Surtain is taking care of, is valid. And if that turns out to be kind of from your backfield, that makes a lot of sense to me, because if you had to rank your most dynamic offensive weapons, James Cook, of course, is near the top of the list. When it comes to being dynamic, of course, get the ball in his hands, get him into open space, and he can pull away from anyone. So it's a great matchup to look at. I feel like, definitely looking at it from a perspective of where is the best chance for the Bills to capitalize in this matchup is definitely something that makes a lot of sense in my eyes from what you're kind of evaluating it from, because, I think Orlovsky's been preaching this all week in a lot of different national media things. And I think it's a valid point where the Bills are doing a popular trend and it gets talked to at length about what they do. But effectively, what I like about it is, okay, you want to eliminate one guy and your ISO'd guy with Patrick Surtain. Cool. Now you're just giving the Bills the ability to kind of look at James Cook, Ty Johnson, Dalton Kincaid, all these alternative weapons that are all going to be stacked up on the other side of the field, and they just need to beat their guys in front of them from there. And outside of Surtain, I really only see one defender that'll be in coverage for the Broncos, being Brandon Jones, their strong safety. That really is kind of a guy to at least understand where he is, because he is a phenomenal player. He's been having a phenomenal season overall. But outside of that, it's like, I'm not looking at Barton at linebacker, or I think it's Strand. I think that's his name, Strand. I'm not looking at those guys and thinking, okay, they're going to be able to kind of really key in on James Cook or Dalton Kincaid or whatever it is. It's like that is a matchup that I do believe is there for the taking when it comes to the Bills finding success on the offensive side of the ball, for sure.
So James Cook and Ty Johnson are my answer. What is your biggest matchup in this game that will dictate whether or not the Bills can win? Well, I think the Bills are going to win.
Mine, to me, I'm going to be honest, Josh. Mine is as simple as can be. Bonito and Jonathan Cooper versus our tackles. I mean, that is the matchup. And it's funny because I feel like it's not the ultimate strength of the Broncos defense. Patrick Surtain gets all the credit for being the best player on that defense, for sure. But if I were to say what's the biggest strength of the Broncos defense, it'd be their pass rush. Of course, you don't lead the league in sacks without being the pass rush of a strength. But I believe it all actually starts outside in for them in a traditional sense. And Bonito and Cooper have been great for them. I think even their interior edges, if that's a thing, but their outside interior guys being Zach Allen and Franklin Myers, those guys are also pretty good. And they've been having a great year as well. But Bonito and Cooper, I think, drive the ship. And then since they're the edge presence, and I think Cooper's more of the pure rush style outside linebacker, but that's going to be up to Dawkins and Spencer Brown to just figure that crap out. And they've been great themselves, of course, this season. That's how you win or lose this game. If you're unable to kind of figure out the edges, figure out what is going on when it comes to Bonitto and Cooper, it could be kind of a disruptive day, I guess is the way to put it, realistically, for the Bills offense. And I just think Dawkins, I'm comfortable with understanding. And I think Dawkins being matched up on Bonitto whenever Bonitto wants to be rushing is going to be just a fun and enjoyable matchup to watch, because I think Dawkins is one of those left tackles, Josh, that I know we appreciate him a lot. I don't know if we quite appreciate how crafty he is.
Right.
He plays a true chess game at tackle. And what I love is, you watch McAfee show when AQ Shipley's on and he does his in the trenches segment. And he always, like, the Bills were labeled in his eyes the 5th best offensive line in the league. And he always kept highlighting Deion Dawkins. And he always talks about Dawkins in the sense of Dawkins is always trying to set up the next thing he can do to you as a pass rusher, as, a run defender, whatever it is, whatever he's trying to attack at you based on the play. And what I find fascinating about those kinds of comments, Josh, is that is something that the complete opposite is normally happening. Normally the defender is trying to set things up, whether it's on the pass rush and or just trying to create, whatever it is, leverage, spacing, whatever they're trying to do, they're trying to set things up in a chess game. And it feels like Dawkins enjoys that, and not only enjoys it, but actually sets up his own things that he gets you with his, his like ice pick style move and stuff like that he will get you. And it's got you kind of spinning on what to do to actually find success against him. So then from there, if your left side's good, it's all up to Spencer Brown against, Cooper, and also Franklin Myers will be kind of over there at times. That to me is the matchup of if the Bills succeed or not. I don't think it's necessarily like you're in the mindset of yours where it's like, this is the matchup to exploit. That to me, though, is just purely the key matchup in this game overall, because it feels strength versus strength. And, who actually comes out on top will probably dictate who won the game overall.
This is very much a trenches game on both sides of the ball. And, the Bills O-line has gotten a lot of credit this year, and this might be their toughest task they've had all season long. And this is a loaded group. Any chart you look at, pass rush, win rate, best edges, best pass rushers, these 4 guys that Luka's mentioned, Franklin Myers, Bonitto, Cooper, and Allen, show up on all of those charts. Generally for the Bills, it's only Greg Rousseau that shows up in the quadrant you want to be in. I am with you on that. I think if you flip it around, I am a little bit concerned about the Broncos' ability to run the ball. And I think that if there was a path for the Broncos to win this game, steal this game, outside of, turnovers and, Marvin Mims returning a touchdown, run a kick return, or, a blocked punt or whatever, the stuff that you can't predict. I think it would be a game plan where the Broncos come in and they really try to slow it down. They try to run the ball. They try to win that possession game against the Bills. And, there's some risk in there too, because if you burn 11 minutes off the clock, but you can't ultimately punch it in the end zone, then you've just burned 11 minutes to get 3 points, which usually is not going to work against the Bills team. But that would be it. But I look at the Broncos and I look at their offensive line, and there is some cause for concern. You're talking about Quinn Miners, who's maybe one of the best offensive guards in the sport. And then you have Mike McGlinchey and Garrett Bowles, who, just like Dawkins and Brown, considered one of the better tackle tandems in the sport. But where my point about the running game, I think, gets a little bit easier to not have to fear, they don't have a dynamic group of running backs. You have Jamal Williams, Javonte Williams, a former first-round pick, but, he's had major knee injuries and hasn't been explosive, averaged 3.7 yards per carry. You have Jaleel McLaughlin, who is an explosive runner, averaged 4.4 yards per carry this year, but only 496 yards on the year. And then the rookie out of Notre Dame, kind of a bruiser, Audric Estime. Between the 3 of those guys, Luka, they only have 3 explosive runs this entire season. That's runs of more than 20 or more yards. That's 1 apiece. Bo Nix accounted for actually 6 this season. So I don't think you necessarily have to worry about a Derrick Henry situation where the game starts off, they hand it to the running back and he runs 80 yards for a touchdown. So that definitely helps me think about it from that standpoint. Let's talk about Bo Nix, though, because I think in a lot of ways he's caught a lot of people by surprise. He was the 6th quarterback taken in the draft. You're a big college football guy. I don't know that you necessarily saw Bo Nix. Most people that watched Bo Nix this year that saw him in college have two thoughts. Wow, he looks NFL ready. And holy cow, I never knew he was that athletic. He hit it well at Oregon, I guess. And he's a good runner of the football. I look at this Broncos team, Luka, as sort of like the 2019 Bills. Good defense, young quarterback. Josh Allen was in his 2nd year. That's mobile. Good, not great weapons. But I don't know that like this is the version of the team that's going to go on a deep playoff run. I think this is more of like the version before the version. And I think that they could be a team that goes out and tries to get a T. Higgins or something this offseason to really bring it all together. What do you think about Bo Nix? What is your fear level with Bo Nix? And before I let you answer, I want to give you a couple stats on Sean McDermott in particular. Against rookie quarterbacks in his career, he's 9-4. Rookie quarterbacks against Sean McDermott have a touchdown to interception ratio of 7 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. And then since 2010 in the NFL, rookie quarterbacks are 5-12 in the playoffs.
None of that's surprising to me. And I think that's because the playoffs, you always hear the way people talk about it, right? Where the playoffs are a different beast. It's a different game. It's a different atmosphere. It's everything encompassing. It's a win or go home. And I don't think that's just strictly because of emotions. The key of that all is it's a game plan specific game, right? When you're going through a regular season, you're week planning, you're trying to get through the weeks healthy. Obviously, you're trying to win, stack wins, create wins to ultimately get to the goal, which is get into the dance known as the playoffs, make it to the Super Bowl. That is the objective. But once you get to the playoffs, you have to go and dive in right into the game plan, team specific on the week for who you're up against. And Sean McDermott, to his credit, is a type of individual who is going to absolutely pick apart everything he isolates to. He's going to game plan exactly to what he's seen of the team up against him. And from there, create what he believes, at least from a defensive perspective, exactly what needs to be achieved to dominate. As a rookie quarterback, that is something you have never experienced at this level. That is why you see rookies kind of fall short. You know, not to pull it away from this game, but that's where you hear this talk about Washington versus the Bucs. And all credit to Jaden Daniels having a great season. In my eyes, now you're going up against a Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator in Todd Bowles, who understands the objective, going against a rookie quarterback who loves to just scramble and freak out after his first read isn't quite there. That feels like a great situation if you're a Bucs fan. Now let's pull it back to this game. Same thing. McDermott's going to do everything to make it uncomfortable for Bo Nix, which is probably easier done because he's a rookie than your experienced veteran who's kind of been there and done it and understands the objective of what his offense is trying to achieve and then go there. I will say Bo Nix, the jokes about him are his age and how long he was in college and such. I will say I remember Bo Nix at Auburn, totally different than what he was in Oregon for what it's worth. And like, that's the thing that I could see creeping through a little bit though when it comes to playoff time, where I remember the Bo Nix at Auburn that when the game plan was starting to get away from him a little bit, you might see some of that. It's a term that I know we're kind of familiar with, hero ballish kind of play come out. And that's something Sean Payton wants no part of for what it's worth, but it's instinctual. It's what he had done. It's the reason he kind of moved on from Auburn beyond other things as well. And ultimately then found success in Oregon because he was able to just run a very systemic kind of offense that he could achieve and thrive in. But when you look at Bo Nix's games this season, even in the NFL, like he was good in games where they were taking control of the Raiders, the Panthers, that caliber of team, the Saints. But then all of a sudden you go to Baltimore and you're not finding success. And this is a week that was mid-season. It was like November, where I believe they lost 41-10. And Bo Nix just looked incapable of understanding what was in front of him. And there was just no answers for what's going on. Now ramp that up to 10. You're in playoff football time now. Sean McDermott's going to have a plan A and a plan B for you right out the gate and understand exactly how he wants to attack you from the first snap that you take in an NFL playoff game. That is going to be a lot for an individual like him. That's a lot for any rookie overall. That I respect Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix is going to probably continue to grow a little bit. I agree with your point as well. This feels like a season where they might have achieved a little bit more than they expected. And don't be surprised then if they try to bolster the roster around him and then try to really ramp it up from there. But this is probably going to be, in my opinion, for Bo Nix at least, going to be an experience where we might see some flashes there of a typical rookie quarterback not quite trusting what he's seen and or finding himself into mistakes because of just the caliber of play that's happening in front of him from the defensive side of the ball with the Bills. You're on mute, Josh.
Sorry about that. I'd actually muted myself to answer a work question because I'm still not off the clock over here. I'm on board with everything you said about Bo Nix. I'm excited about his future. I think making it to the tournament, even if they get in and get absolutely shellacked by the Bills, will be good for his future to get that first playoff game out of the way. We saw Josh Allen in Houston in his first playoff game. It was okay. The first drive looked great. A lot of running, not great on the throwing. And, there was kind of a meltdown late in that game. Ultimately led them on a game-tying field goal drive near the end of the game that included a very unnecessary lateral. But ultimately he's gone on to become one of the best quarterbacks statistically in playoffs in NFL history. Luka, we want to go to predictions on this game and then the other wildcard games this weekend. But before we do, I want to ask you kind of a worst case scenario. You and I are going to be doing a post-game podcast on Sunday, Bills Broncos post-game. If we're living in a world where the Bills lose this game, and it's not because of something, like Josh Allen gets hurt on the second play and just changes the entire dynamic, what kind of conversation are we having on that post-game show? Are we talking about heads need to roll? What does that look like?
You're starting to get into the real conversations, not just emotional reaction conversations, but the real needed to be had conversations where there is the need for organizational change. What that entails will probably start from a look at the coaching overall. If you were to find yourselves not going to the divisional round for the 5th straight season because of whatever had taken place, whatever it is, I don't think the acceptable kind of quote unquote scapegoat firing that has been a Sean McDermott staple, it feels like at this point, would be enough. And therefore, there's probably going to have higher conversations about not necessarily saying that Brandon Beane needs to go, but does Brandon Beane have enough acumen at least to then look and assess at everything and be like, hey, I've given you this roster that continuously provides what feels like a Super Bowl caliber team, and the coaching staff that's then being put in charge of it is not good enough to get it over that line, because it feels like a systemic failure if you were to host this Broncos team who, as we just talked about, feels like, respect to them, they're a good team. You don't get to the playoffs because you're not a good team, not even a potentially great team. But they're kind of, out punching their class right now. They're a little ahead of schedule, and you can't fall flat on your face if you are trying to do the things that you keep saying is the goal for this team and this organization by laying an egg at home in the wild card to the Broncos. Like, that just, it's unacceptable overall. So in a worst case world, yeah, that's the conversation that we'll be having on Sunday night as we record the podcast that drops Monday. That is the worst case situation. And truthfully, I would be stunned if there isn't major changes made if we are to live in a reality where that is what takes place.
I think the McDermott conversation would get very, very loud, because if you want to say, oh, well, this was a rebuilding year, we didn't expect much, the PR talking points will come out in the end of season press conference from Beane and McDermott. If this does happen, like, people said we were going to, do X, Y, and Z this year. We lost all these guys. We won 13 games, but we just didn't get done in the playoffs. But the counter will be, you had a roster that went on the road and beat the Detroit Lions. You had a roster that beat the Kansas City Chiefs. You had a roster that won 13 games and won your division going away. We don't want to hear about the fact that this roster all of a sudden, when the calendar flipped to January, was now deficient and unable to win this. You traded for Amari Cooper midseason because you thought this was a roster that could win. So I do think the volume will turn up, and I absolutely have no interest in living in that world, Luka. So I don't think we're going to, but let's find out right now what we both think is going to happen in this game. It is prediction time. The Bills at 13-4, we have to count that fourth loss against the Patriots, I suppose, will be hosting the 10-7 Denver Broncos on Super Wildcard Weekend. We're going to go through and pick the rest of the playoffs too, but by the time this game kicks off on Sunday, we will know who the Bills will play on the following weekend if they were to win. Who wins this game, Luka? What's the score and why?
So we keep talking about what would it take for the Broncos to come into Orchard Park and win. And we mentioned, it would take mistakes, turnovers, the inability to play up to the level that they need to or are expected to when it comes to the Bills. And that's kind of how the Broncos need a fighting chance here. It's not, again, because they're not a great team, but ultimately there's a class difference between the Broncos and the Bills. And then on top of it all, there is an understanding of what it takes and what playoff football is like between the Broncos and Bills, that ultimately, when it comes to those individual matchups we highlighted, whether it's the one you had mentioned with the backfield against the linebackers and just, coverage unit as a whole, or mine when it comes to our offensive line, or more specifically the tackles and edges versus their edge and pass rush that they're going to present. It's just one where it's very, very, very difficult for me to see the Bills being incapable of controlling the game. The one thing you had mentioned in the episode or tonight was that the fear of the Broncos being capable of running and controlling the game is there, and the concern against this Bills defense, because of course, for every week, that is the concern, right? That is how you get this Bills team. What I will add is, whether the offensive line for the Broncos dominates enough as much as they need to, you had also mentioned how lackluster the backfield is as a unit, as a group. And that's where, at worst, you might be getting gashed for 6, 7, 8 yards on those plays where the offensive line is absolutely killing you. So if the defense itself can just be very gap patient and just understand their jobs and not over pursue things, not try to play hero ball, whatever it is defensively, and they just are the unit that we know they are and are always capable of being at their best, where it's like, we'll let you take 4 or 5 yards. We'll let you do that. We're waiting for then the field to shrink and then for you to make the inevitable mistake, or you're going to accept this field goal with occasionally letting up a touchdown. There is no big play, it feels like, for this Broncos team. The big play exists in Mims Jr., but if there's one thing the Bills are obviously phenomenal at, it's taking away that big play. By far the least amount of 20-plus yard plays allowed in the league. So it just, I cannot wrap my head around anything other than the Bills being able to control a large majority of this game. I will say this, I believe it will be a backdoor cover when it comes to betting purposes. I just can foresee it being a 2-score game for a majority of the fourth quarter, but ultimately when the gas is finally being let off a little bit, that's where you get a Broncos touchdown to make it an 8-point game, a 7-point game, or whatever it is. But it would take an onside kick and a miracle in order to kind of recover anything out of it from there. So overall, I believe the Bills do win this one, and I'm going to say that they do it to the score of 32-20. What would that be? 24, I think is what I'm saying. Yeah, 32-24, I think is what I got it at.
Luka has the Bills winning. So do I. I have the Bills winning this game. I think this team's going to take it personal that they only had one All-Pro on this team. There's a couple guys on this roster, Christian Benford, Deion Dawkins, that I think had a real legitimate case to be All-Pro. But I look at this Bills team and I don't see the egg in them. It's football. It's a one-game sport. Luka mentioned the guy that I think is the absolute X factor, Marvin Mims. He can return kicks. He can break a tackle and take it to the house. That's a guy that can give you a cheap 7 points very quickly. But for a team that has lost the last 2 years in the divisional round at home, for a team that has been building and building and building and trying to get over the hump, I don't see a scenario where they come in and overlook an opponent. I just don't. And I think this is a good, not great Broncos team. And I think maybe next year they're a team that we're going to be talking about more so, like we're talking about like the Chargers or, kind of like a step up from where they are now, maybe the Texans before they really kind of slid at the end of the year. Not this year. I think the Bills are going to find it fairly easy, not easy, but easier than the projections would say to get their points. Because if you want to play man coverage against Josh Allen, he's going to take off and run. Man coverage means you have to cover James Cook and Ty Johnson in man coverage. You have to cover Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox in man coverage. It is not just cornerbacks versus receivers. I expect Josh Allen to have a very strong day. I do expect him to go turnover free in this game. I think he accounts for 3 touchdowns total. I think James Cook has a massive day, both as a ball carrier and out of the backfield. I think the Bills defense really answers the bell in this one too. I don't know that we're ever going to see all pro Milano again, but I feel like we're kind of creeping up on the best version of Milano that we have left. And him and Bernard out there together is going to be very, very nice. It's going to be nice to see Rasul Douglas and Benford back out there together. I think all around this defense is going to take it a little bit personal that the reason people are saying this team can't go on a run is because of the defense. I think they kind of flex their muscles against the Broncos in this game. I'm going to say a final score of 31-20 with kind of like a cheap Bronco touchdown late when the starters have their hats and shirts on the sideline. And, it really feels like a 31-13 kind of game where we're just kind of watching it play out, hoping nobody gets hurt. And maybe Brandon Codrington gets dunked on by Cortland Sutton. Luka's favorite play in football is Brandon Codrington giving up a garbage time touchdown.
Oh my goodness.
All right, Luka. Well, we both have the Bills winning. Let's talk about the rest of the slate. Let's just go in chronological order at their usual 3:30 Eastern spot or 4:30 Eastern spot. The Houston Texans will host the LA Chargers. 2 teams that seem to be on different trajectories. Texans started off very hot and really just kind of like ran on fumes into the postseason because nobody else in their division really wanted to give them a fight. And then the Chargers, I think they had an end of season run that I think has people thinking they're slightly better than they really are. They blew out the Patriots, who were just dead in the water. And then they finished up by, taking care of the Raiders, who again, another team dead in the water. Overall, I think these teams are probably fairly close talent wise, although I do like the Chargers O-line significantly better. I'll go ahead and give my prediction now. I'm going to go Texans in this game. And there's just, wow. I think conventional wisdom says Chargers. I think the feel of it says Chargers. It feels like maybe this is time for Justin Herbert to get the monkey off his back. But there's just something in my brain, Luka, that when everybody in the world that says the Chargers should win this big game, I feel like I want to go the other way. The Texans showed me something week 18. I forget who they were playing. Was it Jacksonville? I knew it was one of the bad teams in the South. It's Jacksonville or Tennessee, because they were wearing the Oilers uniforms.
Yeah.
And I thought Tennessee was live in that game. I didn't know how hard Houston would play. And Houston went there and just blew the doors off of them. And to me, that was not nothing. And I think Nico Collins is excellent. I think CJ Stroud has been up and down this year, but I do think there is a world where CJ Stroud plays up in this game against the Chargers. I love Joe Mixon, how he's played this year. And one thing I will say about the Texans, we all got enamored with Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and Nico Collins, and now only one of them is left standing. Their defense is excellent. Their front seven is excellent. They have a massive pass rush with Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter, and that is going to be one of the best matchups to watch this weekend, that offensive line of the Chargers against the defensive line of the Texans. I'm going to say the Texans find a way to win this game, and depending on what happens in the next game, could find their way in Orchard Park next week.
I'm going to be frank. I'm very surprised. I will say that because I hear everything you say when it comes to the Chargers historically, right? When it comes to the Chargers, 2 years ago, or I believe it was 2 years ago, one of my hottest, I put an uncomfortable level amount of money, Josh, and then even doubled down on it, was Jags are beating the Chargers in the playoffs, because everyone kept telling me how, and everyone kept saying, this is Justin Herbert's time to shine. The Jags barely got in. It's lucky that they're hosting that playoff game, so on and so forth. And then somehow, some way, the Chargers, even with a massive lead, figured out a way to screw it up and ultimately lose that game. This feels like a different team because the Harbaugh effect. This feels like a team who has a different mentality, who has a winning mentality, who just understands what it needs to do. And you had mentioned it. The offensive line for the Chargers is phenomenal. I think their tackle duo is unbelievable, to be honest. Joe Alt is a left tackle on probably 28 rosters right now, not on the Chargers. And that is, he's going to probably be one of those next great right tackles in this league. That seems to be a hot trend of late. You see the Lane Johnsons and the Penei Sewells. Now all of a sudden, here comes big old Joe Alt. I think the Chargers are built to win this game, because the most frustrating thing with me when it comes to the Texans is, you had mentioned there are a couple injuries at the receiver position, but they don't really have a quick passing game in their arsenal. And I think that's kind of something you need to have in these moments. Like, chunk plays are harder to come by in the playoffs, and because the team is just ready for those things, I feel like, more than usual. And overall, that's kind of where CJ Stroud and Nico Collins find their bread and butter. And then also the run game for the Texans kind of leaves me kind of wanting more. And the only time they're finding success is against the likes of the Titans or the minnows of the NFL. This Chargers defense is no joke either. And you talk about the strength of the Texans defense being the pass rush. Well, it's going to be hard to rush the passer when Harbaugh is wanting to run it 30 plus times at you. And ultimately, you just don't even have those opportunities to take over the game with a pass rush. So, yeah, I like the Chargers in this spot. I like the Chargers to cover. I just think, unfortunately for the Texans, injuries, as well as just still not quite having a full understanding of what it takes to get to that next level, seems to be there. I really question the offensive play calling and everything. I will say, if I had to highlight one thing that I don't care for with the Texans, it's that. I think the Chargers win that game 24-17. I believe that the Chargers, it's not that they're going to dominate, but overall, they're just a better, more well-coached, well-focused team than the Texans, and the Texans are just going to fall short because of that.
All right, so right off the bat, we disagree. And now we're going to move on to the AFC North battle on Saturday night. The Baltimore Ravens, heavy favorite, 9.5, depending on what book you're looking at, taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. They split the season series. Pittsburgh won in Pittsburgh. Baltimore won in Baltimore quite handily. Zay Flowers is going to miss this game. Kyle Hamilton was on the injury report early in the week, but he's good to go. For the Steelers, they will have George Pickens. He was not active in the last game, but he's really struggled since coming back, and it really showed last week against the Bengals, dropping a bunch of balls. Look, I want to find an excuse to pick the Steelers. I think that the Steelers might be a team that could scare the Ravens fans because they do have a history. Mike Tomlin has a history of slowing down Lamar Jackson. The Zay Flowers injury is definitely interesting, but ultimately, Luka, it comes down to, I think that the defense can come up with ways to slow down the Ravens. I don't know if there's a defense out there that can shut down the Ravens. I have seen nothing from the Pittsburgh offense in the last month that tells me they can sustain offense on even average NFL defenses. There are times when Russell Wilson looks like he is just ignoring the middle of the field, and that is where you can really make your hay against these Ravens. If you can get a guy like Freiermuth over the middle or Calvin Austin over the middle, and it just, like, Russell Wilson doesn't, just ignores the middle of the field. Roquan Smith, for as good as he is not an elite coverage linebacker. And I think ultimately, this could be a close game-ish in the fourth quarter. Maybe it comes down to Russell Wilson has the ball in his hands with a chance to win it late. But everything I've seen from him, everything I've seen from the Steelers, I think they're going to come up short. I would be picking with my heart instead of my head if I picked the Ravens to lose, because I would love to avoid having to play them in round 2. But just picking the game, I do like the 9.5 on the Steelers side of things. That feels a little bit too rich for a game that historically is much closer. I would take the points and the Steelers in that, but ultimately I'm going to take the Ravens to win the game.
This is a game that I mentioned. I don't know how to describe it, but there's something about it where I can't define it if it's a respect for Mike Tomlin, if it's a respect for the Steelers, or if there's just some divine thing going on with my brain when it comes to evaluating this game. I'm not going to sit here and pick the Steelers. I feel like that's irresponsible almost as someone that's trying to pick this game. But what I will say is this. I would say that Russell Wilson might be the third most important Steeler in this game. The number one important Steeler is TJ Watt. The second is Chris Boswell. I mentioned it to you before we went live. There's something about this game that creeps in my head where I'm like, yeah, I could see another one of those classic Steelers performances. Something we saw in this exact matchup, although in Pittsburgh earlier this season, where Chris Boswell single-handedly wins the game for them over the Ravens. And what it takes is truly just the defense in the front seven specifically dominating the Ravens and keeping everything in check in front of them, not letting Derrick Henry get going, stuff like that. And ultimately, your weakness on defense being your boundary corners, which are really having a tough season, just not matter because what you think even, your Joey Porter Jr. can't lock up a Rashad Bateman for the most part. I'd really like to hope that he can with a little bit of Minka Fitzpatrick help. So I just think the matchup is intriguing enough that 9.5 points is a ridiculously insulting line. And that could be enough motivation for me that does make this a one-score game for sure. And ultimately, I look even at that game where it was the Steelers at the Ravens, and at one point in time when it was 17-17, from there, the Ravens scored a touchdown, and then ultimately, for whatever reason, the Steelers just were falling on their face at that point, mainly because of Russell Wilson, but it was a close game. And even though the final score was 34-17, that felt like a much tighter game than that. And I think that's the game that's kind of stemming this line. And ultimately, I can see a crazy world where the Steelers do win. Again, I'm not going to pick that. But what I will say is this. If I'm going to say the Ravens win, the Ravens are winning 19-17. This is going to be ugly. This is going to be an absolute classic when it comes to AFC North football. I'm really, really excited to watch it in a really sick to twisted way as a football fan. But this will not be a pretty game whatsoever. And for all the individuals that are Lamar MVP people, I would probably not use this game as one to show why he is an MVP, even though playoffs don't matter for that. Just for anyone that even thinks it matters, it does not. But overall, you're going to see a classic AFC North matchup, and it's just going to be a grind. I will say the Ravens come out of this 19-17, but really, or 19-16, whatever it is, it's going to be ugly. And there's just this weird little voice in the back of my head that's like, the Steelers might be able to take this one. And for that reason alone, I'm definitely not going to say the Ravens blow them out of the doors.
I'd love to see it. And we mentioned Zay Flowers isn't going to play. One thing they're hanging on to in Pittsburgh this week is John Harbaugh said, Zay Flowers can't go this week. We'll try to ramp him up next week, and we'll see if he's able to go in that game. Pittsburgh's taking that personal that he's like assuming there's going to be a game next week. So, these teams, they can take anything personal. But, I get it. They're kind of overlooking it there. So we'll see if the Steelers can go out there and win one for the not the Gipper, for anti-John Harbaugh people, I suppose.
Notre Dame got you full effect right now.
Let's go. Let's move ahead to Sunday. We already talked Bills, Broncos. The next one up is going to be Eagles hosting the Packers. The Eagles injury report dropped about 40 minutes ago. Both Devonta Smith and the A.J. Brown are full practice off the report. Jalen Hurts is good to go. Lane Johnson's good to go. Dallas Goedert is good to go. So the Eagles are getting healthy at the right time. How effective those guys can be is another story. Luka, how do you see this game going?
This is the one that I circle and go. Another situation where ultimately something's telling me to not take the favorite. And I'm saying this outright. I believe the Packers, I think it's almost disrespectful that I've heard some things out there where ultimately they've been said that they're fluttering. They are kind of limping into the playoffs. The Christian Watson injury is definitely one that can kind of dictate the limping comment. But overall, yes, Jordan Love's not playing his best. Watson's hurt. Other things are happening. But as Josh has said, the Packers receivers aren't exactly dead because Christian Watson's out. They have enough guys that are all of similar talents, but also just talented in general, that they're somewhat interchangeable. You can rework what you're trying to do with them. Wicks can come in and they can just kind of take it from there. And I believe that to be true. Another thing I just feel like is Philadelphia, as great as they've been, are running into a situation here where the Packers defense is a lot better than I feel like a lot of individuals are giving them credit. I get very much Bills defense vibes with them, where it's not just one guy being outstanding for them. It's not like the Steelers with TJ Watt being outstanding for them, although Cameron Hayward's been phenomenal. Highsmith is a phenomenal outside of TJ Watt. So I'm not trying to just say it's TJ Watt and no one else, but the Packers are just a unit that is phenomenal. In total defense, I do believe they're fifth, top five in the league. They are a unit that can frustrate the Eagles. And the Eagles are going to maybe be in a situation where Jalen Hurts has to make some plays to win the game for them. He's off concussion protocol, but he's been off. There could be a little bit of rust and a little bit of a slow start for them, that if they were to start slow and the Packers are able to do something like I remember them doing in Seattle, totally different competition, but where they're able to kind of dominate early and jump on the situation, capitalize, and you get Josh Jacobs going, which is going to be a tall order against this Eagles D line. But if you can do those things, you can really start to control this game early, put that on Jalen Hurts' shoulders. And I'm not a firm believer in Jalen Hurts to the point where I can foresee the Packers winning this game outright. And I'm going to pick the Packers to win this game. I believe they will win this game. I think Jordan Love is still better than what we've seen. I think the running game overall is very good. I think LaFleur deserves a lot of credit for a lot of things offensively. And the defense is just overlooked constantly when it comes to the Packers. I'm going to take the Packers here to win 27-20 over the Eagles.
If you want to find the NFC's equivalent to the Bills and the Ravens, it's probably the Eagles. And I know the Eagles have made it to the Super Bowl with Sirianni, but I think when you look at what fans are thinking about him, there's a lot of fans in Philly that just aren't sure if he's the guy. They look at this roster and they think that maybe they should have had a trophy or two by now. I think this is the kind of game, Luka, where if we get through the first quarter and the Packers are winning, or we get through the first quarter and the offense just looks out of sorts, I think that Philadelphia negativity could start to work against the Eagles, and maybe that works in the Packers' favor. I'm going to ultimately pick the Eagles to win this game. I love what they can do on their defensive line. I love the way they can control the line of scrimmage. To me, right up there with Baltimore and obviously the Chiefs, I think they're one of the scariest teams as far as matchup-wise for the Bills. So I would love to see them find a way to lose in the tournament before getting to the Super Bowl if the Bills were to make it there. But I just feel like the fact that they're getting healthier, the fact that the Packers are going to be without Christian Watson, they do have great wide receiver depth. We've talked about that. But I haven't loved, no pun intended, what I've seen from Jordan Love consistently this year. It feels like there's times when he looks like maybe he's on the verge of becoming a top 5 quarterback. And then there's times where he just makes mistakes that you wonder what he was thinking. And I want to lean more on Jalen Hurts, who's kind of been there, done that in the playoffs. So I'm going to take the Eagles. I do think it'll be close, and I think it'll be one of those games where Eagles fans are uncomfortable. Sunday Night Football, while we're recording Bills Chat podcast, Luka, we have Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. A lot of hype around the Commanders in this game. The Commanders really, had a strong showing in the second half, ultimately came back and beat the Falcons to secure a playoff spot, and then beat the Cowboys to earn the right to basically avoid the Eagles in the first round. And now they find themselves in Tampa Bay against a Bucs team that really had to go all hands on deck against the Saints the last week of the season just to hang on and win that game to win their division. I look at this matchup, Luka, and I think there's a lot to like about the Commanders. I love the way Jaden Daniels, he's one of my favorite players that's not on the Bills to watch. I have him in Dynasty, so I have a soft spot for him. I love Terry McLaurin, always have. I am completely shocked at just how amazing Cliff Kingsbury has been as an offensive play caller this year, and did not see that one coming. And all the metrics love him as far as personnel usage, variety. It's caught me off guard. I like their running back situation, Brian Robinson. I ultimately, though, I think this Buccaneers team, while streaky, I don't know what the Commanders can really do to slow them down. Their defense, to me, is just that's where they are going to have to attack this offseason. We talked about it with the Broncos, like maybe they're a year ahead. The Commanders feel a year ahead. They need an offseason where at the trade deadline they acquired Marshawn Lattimore, but really go out this offseason. Maybe they're a player to try to get Myles Garrett. Maybe they're the kind of team that goes out and swings big on a free agent or two. The offense feels like it's ready-made. Let's go out and build up the defense. But right now, I feel like barring a situation where Baker Mayfield has an off day, I just feel like with the weapons they have in Tampa, with McMillan, with Evans, with White, both running backs there are fantastic, and then obviously Baker having a tremendous year. I just feel like ultimately the Bucs are gonna score more points than the Commanders are able to keep up with, and I think that the Bucs will find a way to win this game.
Yeah, I'll keep this one a little bit shorter because I'm looking at that clock there. It's 5 minutes to the hour since we started recording here. I think we share a mind on this one. I think Washington has been very good. I think Dan Quinn's building something that's very nice there culturally. Overall, really putting the Dan Snyder era in the rear view mirror, and it can't get more distant if you're a Commanders fan. But the Buccaneers defense may be atrocious, and they kind of just let you have whatever you want. Todd Bowles is an individual that I believe can at least take advantage of a rookie quarterback, making them uncomfortable. And I don't think it'll be as of a big difference as we saw in week 1 when these teams played each other. But overall, I think rookie Jaden Daniels shows up, and you'll see those mistakes similar like what I mentioned with Bo Nix in the Bills matchup. And ultimately, Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans will be able to kind of get things in order. Bucky Irving's going to be a massive X factor in this game, and the Buccaneers are going to win. I think it's probably going to be it's probably going to be the highest scoring game of the weekend overall. Just both defenses are not nearly as good as the offenses they're trying to come up against. I think also realistically, I think too much has been made about Marshawn Lattimore against Mike Evans. I know there's a history there. I know it's a battle that everyone's going to look forward to see. I bet you a punch might get thrown. That I can absolutely see that. There's personal history with those two. I think Marshawn Lattimore's better days are behind him. I think there's a reason that the Saints were okay with moving on from him. And he's coming off an injury where ultimately Mike Evans, who's coming off of a very happy consecutive 1,000-yard season, that, I think Tampa kind of pulls away in the end. I'll give a score here, but I really haven't thought about it too much. I'll say Tampa wins 34-17. I ultimately, I know 17 doesn't sound like a shootout or higher scoring, but I could see Washington scoring more, but I'll just say 34-17 because I think Tampa easily covers as well.
The last game on the slate is going to be now in Arizona, as the Rams had to move this game out of LA due to the wildfires that were going on in LA this week. The LA Rams take on the 5-seed Minnesota Vikings, one of the best records ever for a 5-seed. You know what, Luka? There's a lot of reasons why I like the Vikings defensively. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is an amazing player. Aaron Jones, very good. But there is just something about Sam Darnold in a big spot against Matt Stafford that just makes me uncomfortable picking Sam Darnold to win. I think if you were to remove the quarterbacks, the Vikings have a significantly better football team. But I'm going to lean on the fact that playoff football a lot of times comes down to quarterbacks. They can't win it for you by themselves, but they can lose it for you by themselves. And we've seen Matt Stafford elevate his game in the playoffs, and I'm shook by some of the passes that Darnold missed on Sunday night last week with Jordan Addison wide open in the end zone. So for now, I'm going to say the Rams rally. Hey, they win one for a city of LA that could really use some good vibes right now, so that would be kind of cool too. But I don't really have a good X's and O's reason for this because I do believe the Vikings are the better team. But to me, this is just one where it's a quarterback mismatch.
Yeah, I will say about this matchup, naturally, because the Rams were supposed to be the home team, I find it funny that the narrative of the LA fires and everything going on there has been there for it and very present, but not for the Chargers. I just want to put that out there just because I find that very interesting. I feel like you don't hear it in reference to the Chargers because the Chargers are naturally playing on the road and all. It's like, I think that narrative for both of these teams is equal. I will say that the only difference is, of course, the LA Rams had to not be able to play their home game that they earned. And ultimately they have to go to Arizona and play at State Farm Stadium. But I don't believe that that's something where it's so massive that ultimately the Vikings are going to go over the edge because we share a brain in that one big thing. And that is I believe Sam Darnold has more potential to turn into a pumpkin than actually win the game for you. And I believe in Matt Stafford being able to win the game for you more than do something that has you ultimately fall short. I think McVay is a phenomenal coach, of course. I think that the questions on why they've kind of not been able to be as efficient on offense since that Bills-Rams game is a little bit of maybe just they came up against more known opposition, plus ultimately they might have been pulling off the gas a little bit to then ramp back up for the playoffs once playoffs come around. And I think this is actually a matchup that favors the Rams overall. If you're going up against a hyper aggressive defense, what is nice is to have a super smart offensive coach that knows exactly what he wants to do and how to control the game as best as he can in McVay. That, I'm not going to sit here and say that smart money would be on Sam Darnold and the Vikings. As great as a season as it is, I do see kind of history of this season repeating itself for the Vikings. Vikings have only lost to 2 teams after they lose this game, and that is to the Lions and the Rams, and it would be both back-to-back weeks. Give me the Rams 27-21. I just think the Rams come out on top, even being displaced to Arizona for this game. I just think they're a better team when it comes to the quarterback and coach. That is really what no disrespect to KOC, by the way. I think Kevin O'Connell is a phenomenal coach in his own right. Sam Darnold's not the way he is, but I think McVay is just a notch better. And if you have the better quarterback, if you have the better coach, I believe that you have a better chance to win, and you can kind of disguise the deficiencies elsewhere. Yes, Justin Jefferson's very good. Jordan Addison's very good. The Vikings defense is also great, but I think they will just fall short in this scenario, and the Rams will move on 27-21.
If I don't know how to look this up, but if the Bills, the Ravens, the Bucks, and the Vikings were to win this weekend, it has to be the first time that 4 quarterbacks taken in the same first round of the same draft class all win a playoff game in the same week. I can't think of another example where that would be even possible, because I mean, how many quarterback classes go 4 deep where you have quarterbacks that they all make the playoffs and win playoff games? There's always like a JP Lossman ready to ruin it for an Eli Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers. So maybe I'll have some fun with that after the show's over and see if we can find the answer.
Someone's going to be hitting the chat right now, Josh, just absolutely crapping all over you with that one.
Yeah, like, you forgot about 1965 when Sid Luckman. It's like, I did actually forget about that.
I was going to say the only draft I could think of is like the Elway draft, of course.
But you know what's tricky about the Elway draft is Elway, Kelly, and Marino were all like going against each other, so it'd be hard.
Yeah,
Kelly always had a bye, so it's just like, the same weekend makes it tough.
Right. Yeah, a lot of it was AFC driven, so it does make it difficult for them to then all win simultaneously. So yeah, it's a good point there. But I think Sam Darnold
class is all spread out.
Yeah.
Where's Rosen?
Who cares?
I have been refreshing Twitter like crazy. The Bills have not dropped their depth chart, but Luka, very quickly, last year when you talk about going into a Chiefs game with Terrell Bernard out, Tyrell Dotson playing with one arm, Daquan Jones playing with one arm, no Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas barely able to walk, AJ Klein off the couch. It's a breath of fresh air that really the only concern for the Bills this week is Codrington with a potential hamstring injury where he's questionable. Jamarcus Ingram was back at practice this week. Congratulations to him and his wife on the birth of their kid. I just said wife. Him and his family. I have no idea if he's married or not. And then you look at the rest of it. It's all health and it's good news and it's a breath of fresh air, Luka.
It is. It feels like the first time since 2021 where you are going into the playoffs at a very healthy level. And of course, 2021 playoffs had a really good opening 119 minutes and 47 seconds. Unfortunately, those last 13 going into bonus time came up a little short. But hey, we don't have to dread on that anymore. Overall, it is nice to be healthy. Like you mentioned, the past couple seasons, there's been a little bit of a limping into the playoffs more than kind of being ready to go. And I think, one, they navigated injuries well this season, and they also did have that luck when it came to just really not having too many major injuries. Milano was really your only one where he came back, had another unfortunate setback, but luckily for him, it was early on in the process that he was able to come back and still ramp himself up going into this, where yes, you're not getting a fully healthy version of him or even one that's close to the all-pro version of him, but you have him there available. And that is the only guy who I can look at that's very notable, as you said, that is, not really at the late season 100%. And I'm doing air quotes here because it's like, of course, no one's at 100% after the season. If you are at a true 100%, you are not trying hard enough during the regular season and or at your job. And I don't think any of these guys fit under that bill, as McDermott would never allow that for them to still be on this team and be noteworthy going into the playoffs. So very excited to see what that kind of evolves into as these playoffs progress.
Speaking of 13 seconds, if the Broncos suffer an injury at cornerback, Levi Wallace could be coming in off the bench. So we have that to look forward to. All right. Well, for Luka, I am Josh McCarty. Enjoy this playoff weekend that actually does start tonight. If you're into college football, we have Texas going against Ohio State. I got Texas, by the way. I know they're 5.5-point underdogs.
I just need to say this now. I need Ohio State to win to make me feel better. Because if Texas were to win this game, I'm going to be so upset because they shouldn't. At the risk
of this show going 2 more hours for my Arizona State fan over here, I'm going to go ahead and cut him off. I'm going to help him get to this lacrosse game tonight. All right. For Luka, I am Josh McCarty. We will talk to you Sunday night, Monday morning, and hopefully celebrating a Bills playoff victory over the Denver Broncos. We'll talk to you then.